Did the Dallas Cowboys find a hidden gem on day 3 of the NFL draft? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, today we are talking about two of the Cowboys' day 3 picks, Eric Scott, Jalen Brooks. And one of my favorite parts of this show is that we don't discuss notes at all before we get into these players because we want our honest, raw reactions to these players. So let's go ahead and start with Eric Scott, who the Cowboys traded up for, was at the top of the 6th round, for a cornerback that I don't think a lot of people heard of pre-draft.
No, I don't think a lot of people had heard of him, and after going back and watching, I'm surprised we didn't hear more about him. I really liked his tape, or at least I liked what I saw, and I was surprised that he was not on very many people's radars before this. And I think part of it probably is what you're showing right here, right? That 4.71 that was listed as his 40, but there is obviously, from what we've heard and frankly from what I've seen, a lot of circumstance behind that, including the fact that he was injured previous to running that 4.71. I think you can have a conversation about the decision-making process to run 40 after hurting your quad in testing, but I think that at least explains the numbers there. But
I mean, I think a lot of these guys that are projected to be late day 3 picks or undrafted free agent guys, like they feel like they have to run, right?
Yeah.
They've got to get at least some number on the board for NFL teams.
But I would say that this may have been a case where this guy got further slipped through the cracks because of that number. I mean, there's got to be teams out there that take corners who run 4.7s off their board completely, right?
I mean, you should. The history of cornerbacks that run in the 4.6s is extremely low. When you're talking about 4.7s, there's really no hits over the last 25 years.
So the rumor is that this guy actually runs a sub 4.5, right? Like that's what he was running in training, or at least around a 4.5, which would make a lot more sense. And honestly, like, you watch his tape, that's what he looks like he plays with. And all the other testing, like, you don't usually have what is it, 11.01 broad jump or a 39.5-inch vertical and then run a 4.71. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, those numbers don't line up really explosion wise.
Right. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see that we have his RAS score up. And right now he's in the 87th percentile. We're rounding up, even with a 4.71. Yeah. And a 1.61 10-yard split, which is in the 40th percentile. If you just project a 4.5 Landon, and by the magic of RAS, boom, a 4.50 40-yard dash puts him in the 99th percentile of athletes among cornerbacks. That's why the 40 is so important here, because everything else is off the charts.
And I'll go here with this, right? Usually, and I've talked about this before, I like to turn on the game before I know what jersey number the player is, usually, to see if I can identify the player, right? Especially when we're talking about players who play on teams like Southern Miss or, not Alabama or Ohio State, right? Teams where this player should stand out, right? And he did. Like, he was very easy to identify which corner he was. Now, they have a number 0 on their team that I actually think could be pretty decent football player as well.
Yeah.
But if you just look at him, he's long, he's athletic, he's just drips confidence. Like, he flips his hips really cleanly. He moves well. Like I think I saw you tweet about the Tulane game, and I also watched the Tulane game that he played, and they didn't want to have any part of him.
No.
And when they finally did, he finished the game for Southern Miss with that pick six. So
by the way, Tulane was pretty decent this year as well. They beat
they were
USC.
one of the best coach teams in football, I
Yeah.
would say, in college football. Yeah. So like this isn't like that wasn't like some small feat for a school like Southern Miss. So I just see a guy who I think, has a ton of athletic ability, looks comfortable playing cornerback. Like, I don't know. To me, when I watched him, I just kept on feeling like, why is this guy not a higher prospect? That's what my brain kept on going to. Not that I felt like he's a first round or any of that, but like this guy read to me like a fourth round corner, right? He's athletic. He has good traits. He hasn't played a ton of high level competition, but when he has, he's played well.
Yeah.
I'm a little confused by Eric.
One of the things that I noticed right away, thanks to PFF, big fans of them over there, I was able to watch all of his like down the field targets, and he does a really good job on passes down the field. And that's where the height, the weight, and the explosiveness comes in, right? Because you can just catch up the balls. He just has a very good feel to that part of his game. Where I think he struggles a little bit, and this is probably why he's a day 3 pick and not a top 100 pick, is he has a hard time with some of the underneath routes and quicker receivers. Like, I think those are the type of guys that are going to give him trouble in the NFL. And I just wonder, like, if you need him to be like an off man coverage, I got some concerns there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if the Cowboys play a lot of off-man coverage, which, they mostly play press. And that was the other thing, too, that you saw him do, is that he was very good in press bail. Like, he didn't get his hands on corners easily, or a lot, really, but he was very good at lining up and press and then flipping his hips immediately and running up the field with guys. So,
sure.
I think that a lot of that's the kind of underneath stuff is going to be solved by usage, like by how he's played in the scheme.
You don't want him playing in the slot. You don't want him covering some of these shiftier receivers, because I just don't think. I think that's where you see a little bit of the tightness in his game. That's just not his forte at all.
Yeah, I think he is very much kind of lined up with the with what the Cowboys like in their corners. He is kind of a silo, corner. So
he's Nashon Wright with more athleticism. I mean, honestly, he really is.
In a lot of ways, he is. So I think he has some ability to develop into a guy that I think could play on defense. So. But I think he's also going to be an incredible special teams player as well.
Well, and I wanted to talk about the special teams part of it, because when you're talking about the 5th cornerback on the roster, you better be able to play special teams. So let's talk about his role on the team this season next. This episode is brought to you by Built Bar. Are you looking for a delicious snack or treat, but you don't want all the sugar and the calories? Then you need to try the absolute best tasting protein bar ever. It's Built. You guys know about Built by now. They are protein bars that are healthy and they taste absolutely amazing. Best part, covered in 100% real dark chocolate. That is right, real dark chocolate. And they come in so many unbelievably great flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. Laney can attest, yesterday on the show, right before we jumped on, I was eating a protein bar. It was the cookie dough one. Giving me lots of energy to do the show. Only 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, but a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't even have to wait to get a box. You can still go to built.com. You can get your order over there, but now you can run into Walmart, go to the pharmacy section and pick up a 4-bar box of the cookies and cream, the double chocolate bar, or the coconut puff. Or if you live near Sam's Club, like I do, you can go in, grab a 13-bar box of some of the hit flavors, including brownie batter puff, and there's churro puff. So many unbelievable flavors. Go check them out right now. You can thank us later. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Tomorrow on the show, Landon and I are going to be talking about 2 additions that the Cowboys made to their backfield, including a certain 5'5" running back from Kansas State. You won't want to miss that. All right, Landon, let's talk about Eric Scott's role on the Cowboys team this year, because it seems like the Cowboys want him to make the roster, right? You don't give up a future 5th round pick for a guy that you're just thinking, he's going to be on the practice squad or whatever. Like, it's clear they have some kind of plan for him. However, we know the top 4 cornerbacks on the roster are set: Trevon Diggs, Stephon Gilmore, Deron Bland, Jordan Lewis. After that, you have Kelvin Joseph, Nashawn Wright, a couple undrafted free agents, and Eric Scott competing for that last spot. Gotta say, that's pretty crowded already in the secondary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that their general thought process here is that you just can't have enough of these guys, and especially by the end of the year last year, they felt like they were in a spot where they had gotten into some down roster corners, and obviously, thank God, Deron Bland worked out the way he did, and because otherwise the Cowboys would have been in a lot of trouble. So I think they're going to spam this position, as much as they can, as they should. And I think it's good to get guys that have athletic upside so that you can develop them into NFL quality players. I think you're going to get less bang for your buck if you just get like a guy with solid production with limited athleticism late in the rounds, because
and there are guys like that for bigger schools, right? You can find those type of guys all the time. The guys that have 27 starts from an LSU that's just an average athlete. Those guys are all over the place.
But I think, the problem is that eventually you can run into a real Jalen Tolbert type of problem, right? Where you have a guy that you want to try to develop, you want to try to get on the field, but if he doesn't have any special teams ability, then you can't really put him on your game day roster to get the experience that you need. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think that they're going after some of these guys, is that it's got to be a combination of both. They need you to be able to be useful in special teams, so that they can get you the development you need to play.
Yeah, you can't develop if you're not on the NFL roster, right?
Yeah,
I
mean, that's the problem.
It's
one thing. Like, here's the thing: it's one thing to be in the on the team, on the roster, in the building. But and you can get development, you can get stronger on the, you can be part of a program, and you can develop a little bit that way. But the real development that happens, especially in a position like corner, is by getting on the field in
by playing
an NFL game.
Right.
Yeah. So, and that's not even going to be possible for a guy like Eric Scott or any of these down roster guys if they aren't good enough on special teams to be rostered on game day. So that's why they choose these kind of guys.
Let's talk about his special teams experience, because he does have some. He has 207 career special team snaps. Now, most of them, over half of them, have come on field goal block. Like, he's basically that last guy trying to block, field goals and extra points. He does have 58 snaps on punt return and a couple snaps here and there on kick return and kick coverage and that kind of stuff. But I've got to imagine with somebody of his size, and the Cowboys are hoping with his athleticism, that maybe they work on him being, a gunner or somebody who's doing some punt coverage stuff. Like, that's got to be his role in the NFL, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I think those are the kind of things that you would especially see him thrive in, right? Like, situations where he can use his speed to get down the field and wrap up and get to guys. Look, I mean, you don't know exactly what's going to happen with Kelvin Joseph this year, and I don't mean as far as a cornerback, because you wouldn't miss what he's done as a cornerback yet, because there hasn't been much, but what you will miss is his play as a gunner. So if for some reason you decide that you're ready to move on from Kelvin Joseph, he just doesn't have shown you enough, you're going to need some solid replacements in that area. So this is a guy who may not be able, I mean, frankly, he could replace Kelvin Joseph's defensive snaps as well, because there hasn't been many. But he could definitely give you some quality snaps as a gunner.
And the thing with Eric Scott we should mention is the price tag difference between a second-round pick going into the third year of their career compared to a sixth-round pick in year one is not insignificant. And when you're a team like the Cowboys that's very close to the cap, every penny that you can save at spots like your fifth corner is something you have to keep an eye on. So if these two players are similar on special teams, I wouldn't be surprised if the Cowboys just lean taking Eric Scott here. I really would, even though the ceiling as a corner might be in favor of Kelvin Joseph. If they could save some money and be similar on special teams, they might go with Scott.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing is that, ceiling doesn't mean much if you're never able to achieve it. I mean, they've given Kelvin lots of opportunity to kind of prove this. And it hasn't been terrible on the field. It's just all the other crap you have to deal with, right? And then the fact that he's being paid like a second-round pick when you have not gotten that kind of production out of him. So maybe, you want to swap that out for someone who's cheaper, younger, and still has some upside that's unfound, I guess is the way to say it.
It's worth noting the Cowboys could save about $1.4 million if they cut Calvin Joseph after June 1st. It might, again, that's not a ton of money in the grand scheme of things, but $1 million difference between two players that you view similarly, and one player has, several more years of contract control, something to keep an eye on. Let's talk about another player that's probably going to become a factor on special teams, and that's Jalen Brooks, the last pick that the Cowboys made in the 2023 NFL draft, a wide receiver out of South Carolina. I mean, the first thing is here, he's slow. And this isn't an issue of like he pulled his hamstring or anything like that.
No, he
is slow. He ran a 4.69 40-yard dash. And for most teams, that's just an automatic cross off. But what did you see when you put on the tape?
I will say that Dane had him at a 4.59, I think, or 4.58 from his pro day. So maybe he's a tenth of a second faster. Who knows? But yeah,
I mean, he's slow. When you watch him play, he's slow.
Yeah. So I think that the truth of the matter is basically what you see in the numbers. Like that's his game tape kind of shows that. This is a guy who, when I watched him, he's got Noah Brown's nameplate on it. Like he's not the same athlete that Noah Brown was. Actually a very, very good athlete coming out of Ohio State, but in the sense that he's built kind of larger. He seems more like an X type, but I mean, again, we're talking about a special teams player. This guy is. Yep. I mean, like, frankly, I saw an interview, and I told you about this. I saw an interview with him right after his workout at South Carolina. And the question he got was something like, what can you offer an NFL team? And then he spent the next 2.5 minutes solid just talking about all his special teams prowess. Like, that's all he talked about. Didn't say anything about a receiving or you get a guy who's going to compete for the ball or any of that stuff. He talks almost exclusively about, his special team ability. So that's the highlight here. That's what the interest is here, is that if you're going to draft a wide receiver in the 7th round who's going to be able to make the team, he's got to have to play special teams, right? So they're looking for guys who can come in and give them good special team snaps, because that's what they will be doing for the Cowboys in the NFL, and then develop them as a receiver, in case down the road, hopefully you're not getting into the situation again last year where you're having to play your Noah Brown as your wide receiver 3. But if there's an injury situation, that Jalen Brooks could come in and maybe not get you killed in the game because he's your only reliable active wide receiver.
And remember, the Cowboys lost 2 of their core special teams guys last year, or this year in free agency, and Noah Brown and Luke Gifford. So it's clear they're trying to find cheap ways to, get that type of production, whether it's Jalen Brooks, whether it's Eric Scott. We'll see. I actually have some information on why Brooks, quote unquote, fell to the 7th round of the draft. We'll get to that right when we come back. All right, Landon, we were talking about wide receiver Jalen Brooks from South Carolina, who the Cowboys took in the 7th round. Talked to somebody who does a lot of scouting reports for a big name company this week. And they said that they initially, early on in the year, gave him a 4th round grade just based on film. He was one of the best contested catch receivers in the country last year, but just doesn't have a lot of experience because he stepped away from South Carolina in 2021, like halfway through the year, came back, was pretty productive this year. And then in their bowl game, he actually, there was some kind of off-field incident that nobody's talking about where he was not allowed to play in the final game of the year. But
was it that he wasn't allowed? So this, I'm actually asking because I did my own digging here. Was it that he wasn't allowed to play, or was that he decided that he didn't want to play?
No, Shane Beamer said that it was an off-field issue that's going to prevent him from playing.
Okay, but that still doesn't answer my question. Because here's the thing. Shane Beamer and the South Carolina team did a whole very emotional video about how proud they were of specifically this guy.
Yes.
And he was a captain for this team, wasn't he?
I believe so. The last year, yes.
Yeah, and so like there's lots of talk about like how when he came back from whatever happened in 2021 that that he was a changed person, had recommitted, and that didn't sound like it was it was not it wasn't on the field whatever happened, but it didn't sound like it was an arrest
Yeah,
or
who knows?
it sounded like a personal issue, right? Like something
Fair
like that.
point. For whatever reason, he didn't play in the final game of the year because of an off-field issue.
That could have been a police thing. Who knows? Yeah, for
Yes.
sure. Like that's
We
the
don't
one
know.
we didn't get very much
Right.
information.
Again, when it says off-field issue, it could just be, there was problems at home with a family. There could be, he was sick or whatever. We just don't know. But it's worth mentioning. But he did play quite a bit on special teams in college. Just last year, he had 87 special team snaps. It was all on punt return and punt coverage. They used him as a gunner a couple times. Sometimes they used him. I was watching a rep today where he was like a slot gunner for them, where they basically put him in the slot and let him run that way. The thing that I noticed right away, and you can see this on his RAS score if you're watching this on YouTube, he's got over 34-inch arms.
That's what I was going to point out next.
And there's a couple times where he's able to just stick his arm out there and get a tackle on, punt coverage. And it's pretty unique. I think that's where his calling card is going to have to be in the NFL.
Yes.
And I'm fascinated to see who ends up winning this fifth receiver job, because I think Simi Fehoko is a far better athlete. But this guy might end up being the better special teamer.
Yeah. And I think that's the interesting thing here, right? Is that those 34-inch arms also help him as a receiver, right? Because you talked about him being a very good contested catch player. Doesn't have a great vertical. He's a 35-inch vertical, which is pretty middling, frankly. But what he does as well as anybody is reaches above his head to catch the ball. And you see it a lot where there are corners like trying to go through his back, and he's reaching out with those long arms towards the ball to catch it. So that part I feel like, and then also having 9.5-inch hands. That's a pretty decent size.
So it reminds me so much of Noah Brown. Now, you mentioned Noah Brown. He was younger and more athletic coming out of school, but I think that's the type of player you're hoping to get here.
Yeah, and then maybe he can give you something as a receiver as he develops, because I think this is going to be the kind of guy who's going to win with savvy. He just does not have the athleticism to be someone who's going to burn you, but if he can give you a little bit of separation with some savvy in his routes eventually, and then until then he can use his long arms and hands to kind of be a contested catch is not a translatable skill into the NFL as far as I'm concerned. It's not something you should bank on for a wide receiver going from one league to the other. But when you're talking about a 7th round pick, having that ability to be good at it, and I think 34-inch arms translates to the NFL as a wide receiver. It's a starting point, and again, that combined with the special teams makes this late round pick make sense.
Just to go back to the beginning of this segment, people around the league had 4th, 5th round grades on him, but when you run in the 4 6s, you just get crossed off a lot of boards. So I think a lot of people thought his tape was good enough to be a top 150, 175 pick. Is he faster than that 40? I don't know. He doesn't play fast as a receiver, but there is some build-up speed when you watch him on special teams, and he plays aggressively and he plays hard. So we'll see. I'm certainly not ruling him out. I would not be surprised at all if he's on the active roster at some point this season. I really wouldn't be.
No, I wouldn't either. Simply because I think he can be a useful special teams player, and if he needed him to come in and block somebody, a linebacker on the edge, real quick to shield off for a run, I think he could probably do some of that too.
Last question before we head out. Of these two players, Eric Scott and Jalen Brooks, which one do you think is more likely to make the 53-man roster this season?
I think it's Eric Scott. I mean,
even though cornerback is way more loaded?
I do, because I think he's a better player than Jalen Brooks is. I don't know. I mean,
I agree with you, by the way.
To be fair, we just have not seen a ton of these guys yet. It's really hard to find Eric Scott tape. It's Jalen Brooks, South Carolina makes it a little bit easier, but I think that, they're in different situations. But to me, I see Eric Scott as a guy who I think could develop into the person who actually plays on defense regularly. Right. Whereas Jalen Brooks to me will always be wide receiver 4 at best. I don't know where the upside is for Brooks other than special teams and guy who can play wide receiver if he needed to.
Is Eric Scott even the best rookie cornerback the Cowboys have added? That's a little bit of tease for
listen, we can get John on here and have that debate if you want. I haven't seen Brooks yet. So, no, I'm sorry. What's the name of
it's Brooks. It's Miles
Brooks. It also is Brooks. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I haven't watched him yet. Listen, Fresno State corners are pretty well regarded around here.
La Tech. He's from La Tech.
Oh, La Tech. I'm sorry. I thought he was.
That's another one. La Tech has had some corners.
Yeah, La Tech is. So we also had a safety that came through here that was pretty good.
Yeah.
There. So, I need to watch him. We'll watch him with all the undrafted free agents. I think honestly that listen, we don't need to necessarily compare one to the other. They could both be good players. Honestly, we'll see. But that doesn't mean they'll necessarily
roster though. That's the thing. Yeah. It's going to come. We'll save this for next week because I happened to watch his tape this morning. But one of these players is clearly the better cornerback. The other one is probably more likely to make the roster. So we'll talk about that next week because it's a fun undrafted free agent class. I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Again, tomorrow we are talking about the new and improved backfield for the Dallas Cowboys. Make sure you guys tune in for that. You can follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.